Hello, everyone, and welcome to Taking It Personally, where you get the best tips about the art world. So today I have Christian Bazant-Hegemark. Did I say that okay?
We'll fix that in a minute.
I apologize. Thank you for being so patient with me. So, Christian, I believe that you've got quite a lot of different, quite a diverse background, and you work on several different projects. I see that you have a digital background with gaming, and then also you manage a podcast, and you also hold lectures and workshops.
That's all very true.
So, how do you balance all these different projects?
I'm not sure whether I have a specific strategy, or maybe I'm not sure whether I have a strategy that I'm aware of. Mostly it happens maybe from some projects having very specific schedules. Like I have this German language podcast about art and culture where we release an episode every other week. So for this, we just need to make sure that we record this in time. But it doesn't really matter whether we record this on a Monday evening or a Saturday morning. And that kind of creates its own rhythm. And it's a very open rhythm. And for lectures, for example, it depends on when people book me, because without anyone being interested, there is no lecture. And so it continues. I'm not sure whether this answers your question.
Yeah, no. It seems like it's a really interesting balance. So there's something that's a little more rhythmic, and then combined with something that's, fluctuates quite a bit. Let's see. And then you're based in Vienna at the moment?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I wonder whether I can stay a little bit more. So because maybe, I just, so that people even know something about me, I could say that because you mentioned those different backgrounds, and I used to be a game programmer, and a lot of people then think that I might have been a game designer. But I wasn't that. I was really just a programmer. And so I was responsible for technical stuff, and I did this for 6 years. And after maybe the 4th year, I decided that I want to leave this industry, the gaming industry, and then through various random situations, I started to draw when I was 24 years old. And then the second time when I tried to get into the art academy here in Vienna, Academy of Fine Arts, I made it in, and then I studied. And so this new phase of my life started.
It's a really interesting multidisciplinary background. Do you find that that your experience in gaming, do you think that's carried over into your journey into the arts?
At first, I thought that it didn't, because the most important or the most obvious thing for me was that I was embedded within a structure of employment when I was still a programmer. And during the studies, I realized maybe in my second year, so after quite a while, I realized at one point, in this industry, I will not have employment. It's not possible. You don't get to be employed to create your own art. Of course, you can find a lot of employment in the fine arts industry, but not to make your own art. And I felt very insecure about that, because that's not, I decided to make art, and then I decided to try to get into an art school, but I never signed up to become self-employed. And I thought it was very weird that this was never explicitly talked about. Actually, it was never talked about in the entire study. I studied there for 5 years. So that was the first part. So there, the gaming background was not so relevant just because of this structural difference. But later on, because I finished my studies, and then I also researched my PhD thesis at the same place. And after that, so only after 9 years did I get to be self-employed.
Wow.
It was 5 years, the normal study fine arts thing. And then after that, it was a PhD program where it should have taken 3 years, but for me, it took 4 years. And only then did I realize or by then I realized it pretty deeply how bad the state of knowledge transfer in the fine arts field is, especially when you come from a video game background, because there people are very open and they talk a lot about the industry and about every side aspect. And I can go on forever about this, and we might, but I end this paragraph here.
No, I think it's incredibly interesting and also useful. So you feel like there was a gap of knowledge in your studies. What specifically do you think was lacking?
So by now, I make the even bolder statement that because I talk to so many people from a lot of different countries about their experiences with art school. People from Russia, Indonesia, Canada, the US, France, Switzerland, of course, Austria, where I'm based, Dominican Republic. So really a very diverse set of people. Of course, I didn't get to talk to 100 from each of these places. It was always individuals. But with art schools, I have the impression they focus on you understanding the craft and, of course, also the history. So your craft, let's say, in my case, it's painting and drawing. It has a history in the Western world, and that's art history. So it's a very canonized story, or many stories. It's also a story or history that is extremely undiverse. It's essentially just a white man's, and actually really man. It's a male story. And so they teach that. And of course, art schools also teach about the problematic aspects of that. But at the same time, they also, I think, they teach a very romantic and also very outdated way of approaching art. Because today, if you want to make art, you need to find time and economic means to do so. So maybe you don't need to necessarily be able to generate an income through the art that you make, but somehow there needs to be some income. And so I think it's entirely necessary to not just teach the studio work, but also business aspects. What is a gallery? How do you connect to galleries? How do you network in a sustainable way so that it's not a little bit cringy? How do you create your work archive? Maybe even very basic stuff like how do you make photos of your work, and how a lot of these things. I could go on, but I skipped this. Because the most important point maybe has already been said. I think art schools focus on the practice in the studio, but in a weird way, in my opinion, because they don't talk about creativity. They don't talk about how do you motivate yourself? What do you do if you reached a goal? Let's say you had a gallery exhibition opening yesterday, but then now, although you should feel joyful, you would expect yourself to feel joyful, but maybe you rather feel empty. Why do you feel empty? How do you handle that? Are you wrong, or is it because you are lacking a new goal and this makes you afraid? So there are so many books about creativity, but art schools don't ever usually discuss them. And that's why I say it's an outdated and a very romantic idea of art that even the most intellectual and conceptual art schools still teach.
That is really interesting because I think for me personally, a lot of us have that romantic vision of just creating art and mastering, the craft, but you sort of forget everything that goes along with it, as well as personal development. So do you think that there is, because you did your studies all the way up until a PhD, do you feel like there is value in attending university, these art schools?
Yeah, so I actually have a lot of criticism, but I don't have proper solutions. I think it's a very artsy way of treating a subject to cry that something is off, but not to actually understand how to improve it. So I'm definitely guilty of that. But I think there is obviously tremendous merit for a society to have spaces that focus on a way of living that is not focused on economic concerns. Because this is, in a way, this sounds like how art should be. You just do your thing. But so I think there is merit in that, but I think it might be beneficial to be more transparent about that, to very upfront say, we can teach you certain things about craft and history and context, but that's actually what we do. We will not talk to you about how you can create a life around that. And that is something that you will need to find out. But we don't want to focus on that. We want to create a space that is different. And I think maybe then, it could already be a way better situation, because I had a lecture at an arts university a couple months ago where I talked about all the things that students that were sitting in front of me that they will need to solve once they graduate. And some of them understood, and for others it was apparently very weird to listen to that because they didn't believe it. And I had a lot of sympathy for that, because I was the same way. Because you are at an institution that is very relevant, and it was very hard to get into it, and now you work on your craft, and now somebody tells you, yeah, but this is not enough. Or it might be enough for your work, but your work will not become visible this way. And you will not be able to afford a studio this way. And so how could this be true if the institution itself doesn't talk about it? Who is to be trusted? The institution, who implicitly, which implies that life is good if you only focus on art making, or the guy that comes around and tells you, well, you might want to start a newsletter and start to collect email addresses.
Yeah, I was curious if, when you, in your lectures, if you ever get pushback against sort of, when you talk to people about these economic and societal pressures, if people just want to focus on just creating their artwork and see what happens, or if, I'm losing my words here.
No, but I understand it. I understand the question.
Yeah. So I was just curious. I was curious. Well, you did mention that there were students that don't want to believe it, but do you get it? Do you also get pushback from these institutions at all?
Well, I mean, I have an anecdote that I can tell, but I'm not even sure. I would say yes, the institutions can push back, but at the same time, it needs to be understood that these are always individuals. Like an institute, like an art school, it might even be hundreds of people in the staff. So if one person tells you, wow, what you do is amazing, it has as little merit in a way as if a person tells you the opposite. But having said that, I had this situation where at a lecture, someone who actually worked at the art university said, well, but the example that I was bringing before that was, well, one thing that we as self-employed artists will have to solve is how many hours to work within a day, within a week, within a month, a quarter, a year. And this sounds like a very basic challenge. But I think it can be very challenging beyond what we would expect, because we need to do so many different things. We need to work on the art. So we have to be in the studio, but we also need to do the networking. So then let's say you have a good productive day in the studio where you stay there for 7-8 hours, and now it's 6 p.m. Is your workday really over if you then go to a gallery opening where you will continue to work? You will very often not go there to expect pleasure. Maybe it will also be pleasant, but you will also have to function there in your public self. So then all of a sudden you might have a 10-hour workday, because maybe you even drink there. Alcohol is very often involved. So what does that do if you're not aware of these hours being work hours? So that was the context of the discussion. And of course, for me, I love to complexify topics and to say, well, no, this is a challenge. Let's discuss this. And in this situation, there was a person from the university who said, well, but how can you tell me how many hours I should work on a day or within a week? And I thought it was a beautiful question, because, of course, I never intend to answer this. My intention is rather to talk about the structure of a challenge like that. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to understand your requirements to work so that it's profound or easy enough for you? Some people have these requirements, others have the opposite. So, of course, I cannot tell anyone how much to work, but I think nevertheless a lot can be discussed about working hours. And in creativity studies, this is exactly what's being done. So this is not a topic that I'm inventing. It's something that a lot of really smart people have written a lot of books about. And so this person said, well, this is too complex of a topic, so let's not touch it. And I thought this was amazing, because and I was a little bit proud of myself, because and also I was somehow thankful for her saying that, because that is the energy that sometimes happens to exist in very large institutions. Let's not touch a complex subject. And then I was a little bit, what's the word? The German word is frech. So I said, well, but we are not actually at a school here. We are here at the university, at the university, it's not just about knowledge transfer. It's also about research. And how can we say that anything is complex in the context of research? This is entirely not what a university should strive for. So if something is too complex, it means we need to invest more time. And maybe you don't personally need to do that, but as an institution or as an international community, of course, we need to do that. Otherwise, how could we solve anything that hasn't been solved before? And how could we fly to the moon? Because we never managed to fly to the moon. I thought it was a beautiful situation for this to come out so transparently, this kind of lack of trust in our capacity to solve complexities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it shows maybe a lack of a desire to place effort into that field, or maybe just feeling overwhelmed by trying to tackle, because as you were saying, it sounds incredibly complex, trying to figure out how you invest your time, where you invest your time, and how many hours you're actually putting in, because it's not your typical 9-to-5 office job. But I'm also curious. So after you left university, I'm curious about your personal experiences with this. Did you have any troubles? When did you realize this issue of time? And then also, I was curious because you've been talking with students about having to contact galleries, what exists beyond all the work that exists beyond actually creating art. Mm-hmm. I was curious about, after you left university, how did you come to discover, how did you discover to do this on your own?
You mean my path into self-employment?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And somehow by that time, that by the time I got self-employed, it was already 4 years after I finished my art studies. So these 4 years were about researching and writing my PhD thesis. It was at this time I also started curating, which was a consequence of the PhD research. I had co-organized an artist-run space in Vienna. So there were a lot of projects and realities that made it very clear that I would be self-employed, that I would have to be self-employed once I had finished this one very specific project, the PhD thesis. So there was no surprise there. The challenge was rather, would I be able to generate enough income, or how would I be able to do that? And this is something that changed over the years. Some years were really nice, and then I ended a collaboration with a gallery for specific reasons, and then all of a sudden, the revenue wasn't. The revenue was affected in a negative way. But of course, I did it for specific reasons, and I was trying to find another gallery, but I never played it maybe safe enough in this regard. And then all of a sudden, for 2 years, I had to rent out a room in my flat through Airbnb to compensate for the money that I was lacking. So it's not a specifically glorious journey, but somehow, and of course, at times I became afraid or really worried. But then I always told myself that, well, as long as you try to continue walking the path, you actually do stay on this path. And of course, you could always stop making art. And this sounds a little bit sad, but it also sounds very nice, specifically to find some sort of employment where you are embedded in a system where you have where you don't have to worry about so many things like your insurance, the income, the vacation days. So a lot of structure would be there. But yeah, for now I didn't do that. And of course, it also needs to be said that people can combine this. It's possible to have a 20-hour job and to make art next to it, and maybe that's a very healthy situation.
It just depends on each individual.
For sure, definitely.
Okay. And I'm also curious, sort of in those more difficult moments, was there any like one specific thing that kept you going and creating your artwork rather than, leaving, like you said, and finding a job or position that, give you a more stable life and, you're talking about insurance and stuff?
Well, I'm not so sure whether there was a specific thing, but so what I can know about my adult life is that I always, in my spare time, I always focused on creative projects. So that started when I was 15 and I was playing the bass guitar the whole time and I was playing in bands. And then later on, when I was 20 years old and I started to work as a game programmer, I was still making music on the evenings, and I still sometimes gave concerts. And so I can know today that even if I would stop making art and I would be in, let's say, at a very mundane job employment situation, then I would for sure still create stuff. It might be way less, or it might be less complex, or like complex in regards to the process that is involved. But even that cannot be known. And so somehow I wouldn't lose this. Maybe I wouldn't lose this kind of access to creativity. Maybe it would more be a transformation where money would come in elsewhere, and I would still maybe make art or make music, or I mean, there are so many things that you can do with your time. And so I think there is an additional challenge to making art when you also want to get your income from it. And there is of course, people who would want to do art full time, they will always think that the dream is to make it full time, but it also means that a lot of your time needs to be focused on tasks that are not connected with art making. All the networking, all the office tasks that you need to do, the logistics of maybe working with different spaces or galleries, and then they want the same pieces of work at the same point in time to exhibit them, and then you need to satisfy all their demands, but you have your own demands. These are topics where if you create art as a hobby, you might be frustrated because you don't have so many exhibition opportunities, but you might not realize that you can actually then really make art for art's sake, which is sometimes a little bit frowned upon, as if it's the ivory tower artist that doesn't care about the world. But I think this is this is not how I experienced it with people.
Do you feel like I was just curious too, and this probably fluctuates depending on certain projects, but I was wondering sort of the breakdown between the time, again the question of time, the time spent on actually making the artwork, and then all the administrative tasks and everything that goes on outside. What do you feel like the breakdown is Is it 50-50? Does it sway in one direction more so than the other?
Cool. I think I cannot answer it for me, because for me it's not making art or, let's say, doing office tasks, like maintaining the website or posting stuff on social media, because already in our contemporary lives, some of these tasks don't feel like work. Let's say using Instagram, but they have a very strong aspect of being work nevertheless. But it's not just work, because you also have your personal communication happening there as well. So it's very hard to put this into a number. And at the same time, I pursue really different projects. Like I have this teaching gig at Art School Vienna, and this takes a certain amount of hours. These could be measured very easily. Then I have the podcast, and sometimes I have lectures, or like a week ago, I co-moderated a conference. And yeah, I would have to track these hours very carefully to be able to give a proper breakdown. And it could be different the year after. So I have the impression actually that I'm in the studio when there are no other projects. So meaning I make paintings or drawings when times allows for that, because that is kind of the baseline. It's like the pulse. Because now it sounds as if it's but then do you even care about making paintings if it's only what you do if you don't do other things? But I think it's like the pulse that keeps everything happening, and it's not something that has a specific deadline. So I try to make it whenever I can, and that sometimes it's really not so much, and then sometimes it's 3 days in a row where I let everything else rest. But yeah, I think maybe the pulse, I never thought about that, but I like this image.
Yeah, I really like that image. It's sort of that, it fluctuates, but it's that continuous foundation on which everything else sort of rests. And it's I really like that image. I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy image or metaphor. It's but yeah, I need to think about that. But it sounds like a good thing, because otherwise, yeah, it's even, let's say you have kids, and then it becomes very hard to find any time for your creative to create your creations. But then it can still be a backbone of your life. I don't want to believe in this. You have to do it full time, otherwise, blah blah blah. I think there can be so much diversity on how you approach your work and your artistic process.
And it's sort of like what you were mentioning before too. That no matter what, that creativity would always be a part of your life. It just might, you might have less time to do it, and you might have to find different ways of still being creative, but it's always going to be there.
Yeah, I'm sure about that, and I'm not sure. I couldn't know whether the art market will be always in my life, because I would love for it not to be in my life. I don't like it so much, but and also I think the art market doesn't like us so much. But just the part about creativity, I think that seems very obvious to me.
And I'm gonna jump off of what you said, because now I'm really curious. What is the biggest frustration with the art market as an artist?
I'm not sure whether I can think of a biggest frustration right away, but I think maybe one challenge that there is that you need to, I think people start making art because for very idealistic reasons, maybe also egoistic reasons, but it's about expressing yourself, maybe learning a complex language or craft. I don't think that a lot of people start making art because they want to make money. And so then you develop your competences and you get better at what you do. And I think it feels often very linear. You get better. But then you also understand more about art history usually, because you also dive into this because you want
Mhm.
to understand the system that you are in. And then you understand that what you do cannot be so easily a linear story, because other people pursue entirely different stories or aesthetics or contexts. And so I think already this shows each of us who make art that this is a very that it can be a very complex and long journey, and none of this is related to economic aspects. It's really just about this maybe very beautiful or also maybe very overwhelming approach to maybe even to living a life. And then all of a sudden this doesn't work, because you need, of course, some means to live a life economically.
Yeah.
And I don't know why the ideal very often is to make art full time, because that would mean, like, already from the words it sounds like a full time job. But of course, in an employment situation where you have a full time job, you automatically get money. The only thing you need to do is to show up and not mess things up. And with art, you can show up and make amazing work, and you don't get a single euro or dollar or anything. You don't get anything. And so then what does this mean? So of
Mhm.
course many people try to find galleries, but then the problem with galleries is that already just the quantity, the balance is off. There are so few galleries compared to so many artists. And then the next thing is that even if you find a gallery, you usually don't have the experience to understand how to judge a gallery. But you need to judge them very harshly, because you need to understand what they can offer and what they cannot offer you. Usually the galleries that I collaborate with, they don't even sign the papers I send them about the works that they get for commission. So
Oh, wow.
this is very normal with the galleries that I collaborate with. I don't know whether it's industry-wide, this situation, but it sometimes even needs to be said very strongly that the work that I give them needs to be insured, of course. And then it needs to be said that it needs to be insured for 100% of what they cost, and not just 50%, because they sometimes think that if they would sell it, since they would get 50% in case of damage or theft, well, I would only get 50%. And to me, this is, of course, not acceptable. And maybe it might be acceptable for someone else. But so there are topics that don't even yet touch the art market, but that are required as some sort of basis to even maybe comfortably discuss the art world, or maybe not the art world, but the art market. So yeah, and since these, going back to the earlier topic, since these topics are usually not discussed at art schools, you many people tend to think that they are not important topics, but I think they
Mhm.
are super important. Mm, and and also, like everything in the art field, they need your individual opinions and solutions. How do you want to collaborate with a gallery? How do you know that a gallery is a good partner for you? And that's just one small aspect, like the gallery aspect. It doesn't yet discuss or doesn't yet go into how do you price your artworks. Do you want to live off of selling artworks, or do you want to live off of giving lectures, or how do you want to do it? Some people make art and don't want to sell it. How how does it work then? And so I don't know. I think it's just a very challenging field to be in, because
Yeah, it's very, very complex.
yeah. And just this one last sentence. It's so crazy to me that this is a field that it requires a lot of different disciplines and people and jobs. Like the art world cannot exist without the collector, the curator, the art historians, etc., etc. Of course, the auctioneers. But maybe this is a little bit egotistic, but I still think that the art world for sure needs the artists to exist, because somebody needs to create the stuff. So how can it be that there is a field that is based on the creation of artworks, but where the artists themselves, the creators, have such a small voice and so little power. Of course, it makes perfect sense because we do it out of self-expression and not because we want to maximize our revenue. But that's maybe why the art markets, to me, are always a compromise that doesn't feel very nice or not to our advantage. Because in the best of cases, we manage to find some way of making a living there. But that is, nobody would call any sort of employment good where, well, I managed to make a living there. It's not a good enough metric.
I absolutely, I think that's an incredible observation because, again, it's something I never really considered. Artists are the lifeblood of the entire sort of industry and that whole entire ecosystem. Without them, really none of it would exist. So I think that's really interesting that there's sort of that. It seems like there's a disconnect between, the artists and their voice, which obviously matters because, they're what the entire industry is based on. And then those that also profit off it, like, curators, collectors, and galleries and such. But
Yeah.
I was curious. Just one final question. I was just wondering if you had any tips for beginning artists. Any tip that you'd have for a smaller starting artist?
Yes. From the top of my head, um, there are quite a few things. The one thing is, don't be on your own, but find community, whether that's to have a weekly drawing afternoon or evening, or whether that's a couple like-minded people on the internet or locally, it doesn't matter, but where you can discuss your work. Because it means that you will better understand your work and you will be able to find words to discuss your work, and that will become very important later on because you will always have to discuss your work, and not as a burden but as an opportunity, the same way that art mediation happens at museums where people book others so that they are being explained what the art is about. And this is a craft that we sometimes miss out on, and it can be a very beautiful craft if you manage to discuss the content of your work without banalizing it. So I think, yeah, collaborate, not necessarily artistically collaborating with others, but meeting others and to see that you are part of maybe an union. You are not doing this on your own. You might do your artwork on your own, but this is a international dialogue. This is a multi-generational dialogue. You are part of something bigger, even if you don't care about it, just because you do something that humans have done forever. And this can, of course, feel burdensome, but the idea of meeting others is, of course, that it feels like less of a burden. Another tip would be to surround yourself with people that appreciate what you do. Maybe not without any criticism, but in general, who are like, wow, this is a tough journey, or it will also be a tough journey, and I applaud you for trying to go this way. I also think that it's important to understand that in the art field, although I said a lot of critical things, it's still a field where I think there's an extremely high degree of agency if you want to see that there is a very high level of agency. You can decide the very basic things. What kind of art do you want to make? What processes, what materials? And then, of course, it goes on. How to sell it? Do you maybe not want to sell it? Do you want to collaborate with galleries? Do you want to sell the original pieces, or do you want to try to make art prints where you sell them for way lower prices and maybe then have a totally different sort of income structure? And there is, how do you want to have a website? How do you want to have your social media platforms? As long as we can, I think, come back to the joy of doing what we are doing, because it's very easy to forget that the more economically minded you get. But there was a very specific curiosity and joy when we started to make art, and it's always there. And when we remind ourselves that this is why we do it, then the rest all of a sudden might not be so bad. And for this, it might of course help to have accountability buddies who tell you, hey, let's meet next month and you show me the new work that you did or stuff like that.
I'm feeling very inspired right now.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you so much, Christian.
Yeah.
Do you want me to? Would you like to correct me on the pronunciation of your name?
Well, I
just
say
one last time.
Christian Bazant-Hegemark, or in English I say Chris, because otherwise it's a religious word. Christian, that doesn't make me so happy. So Chris Bazant-Hegemark, or you can also say Bazant-Hegendas, which is a nice ice cream, or Bazant-Hedgehog, and then it's all fine.
All right, I'll try and practice that for next time. But thank you again so much. It's been such a joy talking with you, and these are incredible tips.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great to talk, and I hope I didn't say too much. I have the impression I totally dominated this dialogue to the point where it was maybe more of a monologue.
No, for good reason. We need your expertise, and your opinions are absolutely amazing. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Perfect. All right, then.
Okay.
Have a great day.
You too.